Hey all, this is Nick and wanted to get another video and notes out for you this week to complete as an assignment worth 10 points. We're continuing kind of our study of some major historical figures that impacted education psychology. And last week we looked at Erik Erikson, who had kind of a big human development impact, looking at the 8 stages of human development. Then we kind of transitioned more to education psychology with Jean Piaget, who was really focused at the kids' age, 0 to 12, and the focus of how kids are perceiving the world. Are they perceiving it concretely through their hands and their eyes, or are they able to gradually become more capable of abstract thought and reasoning? And we went through Piaget's theories. And today we're getting to a third and final practitioner of education psychology who I think has had probably the biggest singular influence on education of any researcher in history. And I'm going to call today Vygotsky Day. Okay, welcome to Vygotsky Day. Vygotsky Day is a very exciting day because we're going to learn about Lev Vygotsky, who really shaped how people think about learning and how the world thinks about learning. He was not perfect, and I have a major disclaimer coming up that we're going to discuss briefly. But this man, Lev Vygotsky, has almost single-handedly reshaped education and the way we view learning. So let's get into it. I want you to take notes with me. There's a copy of this on Moodle. You'll submit this for points. It's worth 10 points. And then later on, as your kind of second part of this week's assignment, so you'll do the Vygotsky notes, you've done the Piaget notes, you've watched a video on Erikson, you're going to kind of do just a 2-page paper that is really reflecting on these practitioners' views and maybe which ones you appreciate and which ones you like and which ones you're more skeptical of. Of course, it's probably a little bit biased by me, but yeah, that's kind of where this is going. The assignment details for that will be on Moodle. I'm still building the assignment and making it just how I want it to be, but just keep an eye out for that assignment and we'll go through all the details soon. Okay, Lev Vygotsky is born in 1896 in the country of Belarus. Oops. But if you know your European history, you know that Belarus was eventually taken over by the USSR, okay? Which is, of course, modern-day Russia. But up until the mid-'80s, it was the USSR, the United Soviet Socialist Republic, which is a historical country that is keenly noted for its Marxism and its communism. And so as we are talking about Belarus getting absorbed into the USSR, historically, we cannot forget that the culture that someone is born in and is raised in shapes them immensely. So of course, the culture environment that Vygotsky was influenced by was largely shaped by Karl Marx's ideas and thoughts. Karl Marx, of course, is the father of communism. Marxism is that idea of the collective rather than the individual. There's no such thing as an individual, but it is a collective. And his theories and philosophies are what lead to modern day and historical day communism. So this leads to Vygotsky having a super strong consideration for what we would call socialization. Socialization in his ideas and thoughts. And let me just define socialization really quickly. Socialization is, I'm just going to make that actually another bullet point just to keep things easy to read. Socialization is the idea that people are molded and formed by their social settings, okay? By the people they're around. That's all that socialization really is. We could get into there's different types. There's cultural socialization, where your culture is shaped by your social settings. There's intellectual socialization, where if you're sitting and having scotch and having these profound conversations around a fireside, that's a certain type of socialization. Or there's playground socialization, where you're learning how to play and have fun with friends, right? But socialization in general is that a person is molded and formed by their social settings. This is a stark contrast to Piaget, who we studied last week, who is certainly viewed as both a companion and counterpart to Vygotsky. Piaget believed that cognitive development was more natural. It was done through stages. It was not necessarily the environment only. Right? There's a nature and nurture component to Piaget, versus Vygotsky would pretty much say nature has very little to do with it. Nurture, and particularly the socialization component of nurture, is what leads to people being who they are and how they learn. Okay, so he was not exactly seeing things eye to eye with Piaget. There is some overlap between those two theories that they developed, but they never would have known it, because Vygotsky died in 1934, and Piaget's work was not really acknowledged until the 60s. And part of the reason for that is Piaget was not really communist, and Piaget was neither an evolutionist nor a communist during that time period, and therefore a lot of his thoughts were going against the ideas of Sigmund Freud, going against the ideas of Karl Marx, going against the ideas of Charles Darwin. So Piaget was kind of this outside, hey, you aren't keeping up with the times kind of guy, versus Vygotsky was fully immersed in Marxism and Freudism and all of that. So, but Lev Vygotsky died young. He died in 1934. He was 38 years old. So certainly not a long life. And he came up with these theories in his 20s and 30s that have just been radically impactful. So let's get into those. The two main theories that he developed are the sociocultural theory of cognitive development. Right? The social is referring to that socialization. The majority of learning happens because of other people, right? And the cultural part, I'm going to give you a very long sentence here to write down. Oops. The cultural part here is the idea that the type of learning that happens in someone's life is fashioned and molded by the people. Oh my goodness, my typos are just by the people one is around and acknowledges as cultural influences. Okay. I don't, perhaps that definition is a little bit jumbled, but long story short, the sociocultural theory of cognitive development is simply this: people are products of people who are products of culture. People are products of people who are products of culture, right? And we perpetuate culture by being grown into it. It's very cyclical, right? And I want you to just think of your own culture and your own cultural history for a moment to give yourselves a frame of reference for this. A really, really easy example is farming and ranching culture. A lot of folks in my family are from farming and ranching backgrounds. And so there's this growing up with the farm and ranch in your life, growing up taking care of cattle, growing up taking care of the bottle calf each spring, growing up learning to ride horses and dirt bikes young, makes someone feel very comfortable in that landscape. And therefore, when that person turns 16, 17, 18, he or she might be thinking, this is what I want to do, and this is the life I want to provide for my kids, just like I was raised in, right? So it's circulating. It's never really ending. And as opposed to someone who maybe might be from the city, from Los Angeles, coming out to Eastern Montana and being like, oh my goodness, what is this world? Who would live this way? Why would anybody want to do that? Why would anybody want to brand a cow? And why would you put yourself in that position to have to be muddy all the time and work in the rain and the cold? And perhaps that person can't even understand why someone would want that, because they're a product of a different culture. And the people that they're around are products of different culture. So people are products of people who are products of culture, and that leads to the perpetuation of culture in most instances, not in every instance. Okay, this leads us to his other main idea, which is cultural historical activity theory, which is pretty much what I just explained. It is a theoretical framework in which a person's, how do I want to put this? A person's cognitive development, okay, so their brain and their learning and their ability to think through things is linked to social activity. Okay, that's what socialization, once again, and history. Okay, and history. Because culture breeds itself. Culture leads to its own perpetuation, like we said here, right? People are products of culture, and those people keep their culture and their customs by passing them down and shaping them and molding them to themselves in some instances, but repeating them identically in other instances. And so who a person is linked to that history, right? It's a link to who they know, and those people are products of their own histories, which means that history reshapes itself in an iterative fashion and is most likely to recur. That is a big, big thing here. And because of that, in education, things like someone's cultural background and the systems, we'll call it systemic oppression or privilege, really matter. Let me get my typos fixed. Right? So we're taking this ginormous theory about the world, and we're saying culture is reshaping people and it's being passed down through generations. So then you get a student or a person who's young, and their cultural background, even at 4 years old, matters. And in this system that is circling and being repeated, there are certain cultures that are oppressed and certain cultures that are privileged, right? And inside those cultures, people have to navigate. They either have to navigate oppression or they have to navigate privilege. I wouldn't say navigate privilege. That's probably the wrong way of saying it. Ideally, acknowledge privilege, but knowing that there's oppression. Okay, and I'm not actually even just talking about race in this instance, or gender in this instance, because really Vygotsky was looking at this at a massive, 5,000-foot view, and in some senses, he wasn't even really considering race as the demarcation of oppression or privilege. In a lot of ways, he was looking at government beliefs, right? He was looking at communism. He was, long story short, if you're a communist in a communist society, you fit in. If you're a capitalist in a communist society, you don't. You'll be oppressed. He was looking at things like how the government of the United Soviet Socialist Republic was essentially maintaining itself historically and iteratively through this cultural historical activity theory that he developed. And he was trying to point out that for people to thrive in the USSR, they needed to know what the USSR's culture was. In the same way, people in the United States will either thrive or feel oppression based off of their ability to accept that government structure. Okay, so I'm just going to make that quick note. Government structure. Government structure is massive at this time period, not just race or gender. Okay, race and gender certainly apply. I'm just trying to give you a glimpse into what Vygotsky was thinking about when he came up with this, and that leads perfectly to this major disclaimer that I just have to include in this video. I just don't think it'd be right. Vygotsky was a self-proclaimed communist and Marxist, right? So this is someone who believes in Karl Marx's theory and believes in communism. And in most instances, his theories that we apply to education and human development were actually geared towards socializing young people towards communism and Marxism. Okay. I mean, I hope that sentence makes sense to you. It's a different culture and a different setting, but the time period is accurate. We could compare what Vygotsky was doing to the Hitler Youth, right? Where in Germany and Nazi Germany in this exact same time period, the 1920s, 30s, Hitler is applying this Marxist idea that if you take someone who's young, you take someone who's very, very young, and you surround them with Nazi belief and Nazi custom and Nazi culture, they will become a perfect Nazi by the time they're old, right? And Vygotsky is essentially the guy that pilots this idea. He's essentially saying, if we want perfect communists in our Russian or our USSR society, we need to educate the youth in such a way that they are around the communists and they believe in the communism and they fully embrace communism. It's the water that they swim in. They don't even realize it, but it's the world they live in, so that when they get old, they will be allegiant and pledged to the USSR. Okay, so Vygotsky is not just doing this for the betterment of people. He's not doing it so that people will become better learners and smarter and really good at math so they can be engineers, or really good at English so that they can publish a book, right? He's doing this towards the end of Marxism. And I just feel like, again, this is a major disclaimer. Some people hate Vygotsky because of that. Essentially, he is trying to tell you how to brainwash people. But a lot of people look at him and go, wow, even though he was trying to create these perfect little communist soldiers and communist citizens, his theories are so applicable because it's actually how people learn, right? He hit the nail on the head in that learning is incredibly social and learning is incredibly cultural, socio-cultural, right? And people recognize, yeah, kids, right? We might not be trying to brainwash them, but kids are products of their social environments and their cultural environments. Okay, so that's my disclaimer. And we're going to move forward now into some of these exact theories, kind of how they flesh themselves out with what Vygotsky was saying when he was telling the Russian government, this is how you should approach school so that our kids become perfect little Marxists. These are the approaches that he offered. The very, very first would be called the zone of proximal development and scaffolding, which came later. But the ZPD is a hallmark of education that Vygotsky came up with. And he said learning takes place in a zone between what students already know and what students do not know. Okay? So in other words, and I could find a nice little graphic for this. I probably ought to. In other words, every kid knows something, and every teacher wants them to know something else that they don't know, right? And where education should take place is between those spaces in the area, the zone of proximal development, right? This zone between what kids already know and what they don't know, which he defines as what kids could know with help, with social interaction. Okay, so the zone of proximal development, let me just find a quick zone of proximal development graphic. There's so many, right? Let me just pull this up really quickly. Here, this is perfect. Copy image. We're going to paste it right here. I'm going to paste it right at the bottom, actually, so that our lines don't get all messed up. Here's the zone of proximal development. Is we have the first circle, which is what kids can do on their own. We have the outer circle, which is what kids can't do, even with help, right? You're not going to teach a first grader calculus, but then we have this zone of what kids can do with help, what kids can do if guided. And this is where education should take place. Okay? So that is the zone of proximal development. In the 80s, a researcher named Jerome Bruner, who was highly influenced by Vygotsky, gave a new term to this middle zone of proximal development, and he called it scaffolding. If you're familiar with construction, you know that a scaffold is simply a metal item that helps you reach higher places, right? A metal scaffold is something that helps students or helps workers get up a little higher, right? So the idea of scaffolding here is that you're helping kids get where they couldn't go on their own. You're helping kids reach something that they wouldn't otherwise reach. And we're applying these theories to this day: math, science, English reading, social studies, every single subject. We're starting with what kids know. We're trying to take them to the place they don't know this, and we're doing it by scaffolding them, giving them marginal steps, little tiny steps to help them get higher and higher and higher, right? Now, let's quickly talk about some critics, because this theory of zone of proximal development is used massively. The socio-cultural theory of cognitive development and cultural historical activity theory are massive ideas, not in just education and psychology, but they are honestly paved the way for many social theories. Even critical race theory is based on some of Vygotsky's thoughts here. Okay, so let's talk about some critics and contributors. Bruner just wanted to be really careful that we don't overstate socialization as determination. Okay, and what that means is the word determination versus disposition is used a lot in education psychology. Determination means a kid cannot break away from their social environment. If a kid is raised in a certain environment, they will 100% of the time be this kind of person later on. And Bruner said we really need to be careful that we never view socialization as determination. Okay, but Bruner really agreed that learning is social and students need help. He is the one that came up with the idea of scaffolding and that teacher helping the students incrementally. Okay, and scaffolders need to be sure to teach openly. Multiple perspectives is one thing he added as well, which kind of combats Vygotsky, because Vygotsky would have said you teach Marxism and that's it, right? Marxism is the perspective. You teach kids to be perfect little Soviets, right? That was his idea. And Bruner came back and said, no. Teach them many different ways of living. Okay? Piaget lived a lot longer than Vygotsky, so he was actually able to reflect on them. And Piaget thought that his theories made sense. But as I probably shared earlier, Piaget doesn't think that cognitive development is hypersocial, right? It's socialization matters, but it's not everything. Piaget said we need to recognize that learning is combination of nature, right, genetics, as well as maturity, time, stages, and socialization, right? So it's nature and nurture, right? Not just nurture, not just nature. Piaget is the true middle man when it comes to nature and nurture. All right, how did this affect education? Oh man, I feel like whole school systems are changed because of Vygotsky's theories. I've worked in education long enough to hear how Vygotsky's theories are used without people maybe even knowing it's Vygotsky. Um, but the very first thing that Vygotsky really brings out is that each learner has capabilities and cultural influences of their own. Okay, that is probably not rocket science, but here this is foundational, right? Every single learner has capabilities and cultural influences of their own. He also added that students have capabilities that are growing, but may require help along the way. Okay, this is scaffolding. Okay, so you have what you know, you have who you are, and then you're being molded and shaped socially. That along the way, people are going to help. Okay, and then of course, each learner has incapabilities as well. I'm going to use Julia, a 7-year-old, as my example for how this works. I think you should just picture, a little 7-year-old, very average student can read small picture books. What Vygotsky would say is the teacher needs to start bridging the gap between capability and incapability. Okay, the teacher's job is to start bridging this gap. So if Julia can read small picture books but cannot read a chapter book, the teacher's job is that's the zone of proximal development between a picture book and a chapter book. Let's get Julia reading paragraphs. Okay, so that's the idea here, is that Julia does not need more picture books. She needs chapter books. She needs the next step. So literacy, this is commonly used as a literacy science. In mathematics, curriculums like Saxon Math take Vygotsky's theories and just use them. They just go, boom, we're going to sequence this so that we're adding a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more, and the teacher will help here and the teacher will help there. Boom, kids learn math, right? Saxon Math is purely Vygotskyan if you've ever used Saxon Math or done Saxon Math. Honestly, another big thing that Vygotsky contributed to education was the idea of groups. Because of everything, he believed learning was so social. He very frequently admonished people, teachers, to group students between low understanding, low capability, medium understanding, medium capability, and high understanding, low, medium, and high groups, right? He would not say put together groups that were multicultural so that they can share their perspective with each other. That's not Vygotskyan. Simply capabilities, right? Again, capability is the goal, with Marxism as the end goal, not necessarily eclectic thinking and open-mindedness, right? So he'd say low, medium, high groups. He would say that schools should have separate classrooms for outliers, right? Rather than keeping someone in a classroom, if they're really behind or really struggling, he'd say pull them out and give them one-on-one tutoring. give them a specialist, and make sure that they are in their zone of proximal development, which is probably a different place, okay? And then, of course, that would lead us to, say, like title classes, where classes are being designed for low groups. So this is the concept known in school as intervention in many cases, and it comes from Vygotsky, and its intervention is the idea that a teacher should take one-on-one or small group instruction periods to help students who are struggling at grade level concepts. This has led to entire published frameworks called MTSS and RTI. I'm actually going to delete this section of notes just because it's not that relevant at this current moment for you to understand that. But Vygotsky, the world of education according to Vygotsky, is this: teach kids the next level, group kids across levels, pull kids who are too far behind, and emphasize meeting every kid where they are, right? Meeting every student where they are. Wow, that just sounds lovely, doesn't it? Isn't that the big goal of a teacher, is to meet every kid where they are? But remember the disclaimer. Remember the disclaimer. It's all not roses and fragrances. It is communism at the heart of it, okay? Now, I'm a huge fan of Vygotsky, and yet I'm also terrified of Vygotsky, because he's made me think about education as brainwashing in a sense. And I never thought I would say that back in my undergrad years and my early teaching years. I would never think that what I'm doing here with you right now is a form of brainwashing. But Vygotsky kind of is calling it out and saying education is a brainwash by its very nature. What are you going to brainwash people towards? Are you going to make them capitalists and independent thinkers? Or are you going to make them communists, Marxists, who are socialized and are relying on the others in order to see their worth? These are the big questions at the heart of Vygotsky. And yet, I know, in a very practical sense, his theories make schools effective. His theories make schools work, despite being rooted in really odd philosophy. So, this is our note sheet. You don't need to add a picture to yours unless you would like to, but there's a lot of notes here. If you need, you can always go rewind this video as needed in order to get notes filled out. And this note sheet is worth 10 points. And check out the assignment on Moodle. I'm going to get it built probably by the end of the day, Monday. All right, y'all. Cheers. See ya.